Hello and welcome back. As promised in my last video, this video will give you some help setting up the Atari and Windows editors for the Evolution Systems EVS-1. But before I will walk you through setting up the editors, I just wanted to give you a quick update on the history of the company behind the EVS-1, Evolution Systems. In my original video about the EVS-1, I mentioned that I wasn't really able to find out anything about the company behind the EVS-1, but through the help of some kind viewers, I was pointed towards some interesting info. As suggested by GridSleep, I used the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine to check out Evolution's ancient web pages, and they revealed that the EVS-1 really was the only synth by Evolution Synthesis, but by far not the only product. Evolution Synthesis made a name for itself as makers of MIDI keyboards and controllers, most notably the UC33 MIDI controller. So it's no surprise then that, at some point, it becomes clear that Evolution Synthesis have indeed been absorbed by M-Audio. Another interesting thing I found was a download section containing not only the original editors, but also a massive collection of 200 presets for the EVS-1 that I've mirrored below. But I guess that's not what you're here for, so let's get started setting up those editors, starting with the original Atari editor. As I've been a Linux user for some years now, I was looking for a Linux solution and found it with Hatari. As Hatari is multi-OS, this should work on Windows and Mac in similar fashion. For obvious reasons, the first thing you should do is download and install Hatari itself. On Linux, this is easily done if your distro supports snap format packages. If you need to get snap support up and running on Ubuntu, enter these commands into your terminal. To install Hatari, all you need to do is type in the terminal window. Hatari will install and you can conveniently run it from the GUI. The next thing you will need is a TOS file. TOS stands for the operating system, and yes, it's the Atari OS operating system. As the original TOS is still copyrighted, I cannot share it here, but the open source EmuTOS will work just as fine for us. You can grab it from the link below. Once you've downloaded the EmuTOS zip, unzip it into a folder and remember the location. Before we go on, be sure to connect your MIDI interface to your computer. Connect MIDI out of your interface to MIDI in of the EVS-1 and MIDI out of the EVS-1 into the MIDI in of your MIDI interface. You are now ready to start Hatari. Pick one of the TOS files you've just downloaded and unpacked in the ROM section. Go back to the main menu and set up your MIDI device in the devices section. Tick Enable MIDI emulation and pick MIDI in and output devices. Depending on your system, there might be multiple entries here, and you may have to do some trial and error probing. The entry that disappears when you disconnect your interface should be your go-to choice. Next, go to the floppy disk section and pick the disk image I've linked below, evo.st, for either disk A or B. Now we are finally ready to run the emulator. Do so by pressing OK and wait for your virtual Atari to fully boot. In order to be able to run the EVS editor, switch the resolution under Options. Then pick the disk you've assigned the disk image to and double-click EVS-152 proc. After the program is loaded, you should be greeted with this prompt, and if you've set up MIDI correctly, clicking yes should result in your computer communicating with your EVS-1. Congratulations! You can now up and download as well as edit patches the old school way. When it's not crapping out, the editor is actually quite usable and reasonably fast. So much for Atari and Linux. Let's have a look at the Windows editor for all you Windows guys out there. The editor was programmed for the now ancient Windows 95, released in, 95, I guess. While I'm not a considerably big Windows fan, I have to admit that it is kind of fascinating that you can still run Windows 95 programs in Windows 10, if not without some fiddling though. Trying to just start a program on Windows 10 will result in a number of error messages, effectively rendering the editor unusable. To solve these issues requires some hacky looking command line stuff. But don't worry, this will not turn your machine into part of my EVS-1 based crypto mining botnet. Or will it? No, seriously, it won't. I will explain every step for you. To get everything up and running, you first need to download the editor from deepsonic.ch. The download zip contains all the files you need, so go ahead and unzip the file. This should create a folder named Evolution EVS-1 Edit version 0.2 beta. Inside this folder you will find the program itself. Running it now will just result in some errors, so what you need to do next is described in the folder called install. Installation.txt tells you to copy the file msstdfmt.dll to the root directory C. Next you have to bring up the command line prompt. This can easily be done by typing cmd into your Windows search bar. Instead of just running the command line prompt, right-click the symbol and select Run as Administrator. If you've done so, you can follow the next step from installation.txt and type and press enter. This will register the DLL file and make it executable.
And now for the tricky part. The other file mentioned in installation.txt is called comdlg32ocx, and trying to register the file in the same way as msstdfmldll will result in an error message, because it's a 32-bit OCX file and therefore needs to be registered in a special way. So unlike mentioned in installation.txt, copy the file into the C windows/syswow64 directory and type
and press enter. After you've completed these steps, you should be able to run the editor without errors by simply clicking on the EVS1 edit exe in the Evolution EVS1 edit beta folder. Wire everything up the same way as with the Atari editor, pick your MIDI interface and you should be good to go. Be warned though that sometimes I had to restart both the editor and the EVS a few times until the connection was established correctly. Once it's up and running though, it runs smoothly and you can start to try out those deepsonic.ch patches featured in my EVS video yourself. I hope this video was helpful for you guys, and I hope to see you soon with another synth.